So I have a ton of sycamore that I'm still in the process of cutting up, and I cut these pieces up this past week and wanted to get something turned out of them before they dried out. I sealed up some and I left some pieces unsealed so that way I could get to them, motivate me to do something with them. I do not round these out very well. One, because I'm doing it with a chainsaw. Two, because I don't have a bandsaw that's big enough to cut these pieces. So it looks kind of crazy and maybe intimidating to some. I would say if you could cut off, excess that you know you're not going to use. I'm used to cutting really out of round, crazy, pieces because, like I said, I don't have a bandsaw, and I'm afraid if I use my chainsaw to cut some of this more round, I'll end up taking off more than what I'd like. So, for design purposes, I find that sometimes leaving those things on gives me a more freedom in designing the piece, and sometimes I end up just cutting it off. But either way, it does take me a while to cut it down whenever you leave extra chunks on this, but I don't mind. It's therapeutic for me. I kind of had in my mind the shape I wanted to go for after I got into the wood, and then as I started to cut, you just don't feel that shape anymore. So as you'll see, I go through several shape trials, I guess, just trying to get a feel for it. I didn't really go into this project I always just go in with an expectation of a bowl, because then that way, if I mess up on a shape or it doesn't work out, then I have a bowl at least. And so that's kind of how I go into every project. I try not to have too much expectation and just allow that creativeness flow and seeing opportunities where I can practice tooling or, practice shapes or try to make the best out of the grain. I kind of just let what's going on with the wood help me decide what shape it needs. So, stretching at a piece right now because that's some rot that was going on in the tree whenever I got it. The tree had came down was being cut down because of rot. So I'm trying to remove some of those pieces. And after reviewing it a little bit, I was like, you know what? I don't like the bottom. I'm just gonna take that off. But that's, how it works. You sit back, look at it for a minute, and you just get a feel for it and just go from there. It's practice. It's good to see what's pleasing to the eye. I don't like to say, well, I made it and that's what makes it neat or cool. There's certain aspects of designs that make things pleasing to the eye. So that's me taking off the bottom because I ended up not liking it. This is a wet piece of wood, so obviously when you turn it around, you're gonna have some wobble. The water in it being slung around in there uneven, but towards the bottom, the reason why I had to reshape this is in all pieces, wet or dry, whether I mount it on the chuck or whatever. If I turn it around after it's been rounded, there's a certain areas in the wobble, I should say, that's consistent. Like I said, whether it's wet or dry wood, especially towards that bottom, like within the first 3 or 4 inches from the chuck, it gets, you feel the wobble a lot more. I don't understand why it's in some areas more pronounced than others, but anyways, it gave me an opportunity to kind of just reshape it. I ended up cutting more away than what I'd like because there was a beautiful feathering going on in there, and I had to cut that away in order to get it somewhat straightened out. Now the top rim, I forgot to adjust my camera so you can see it face on because I wasn't planning on doing this much cutting at this angle, and of course I'm just, going at it. So I'm doing sort of an OG type shape, and I use my homemade point tool. It's just a flathead screwdriver that I angled on my grinder to give me a nice diamond tip. So I'm making some detailing in the bottom, and then right here I was like, oh, should I? And then I decided not to because I wasn't feeling it, and I didn't want to go and make a change that would possibly make me have to reshape the whole bowl. So that's why you see me holding the screwdriver up to it like I'm about to, but no. Typically with wet wood, because it dries as you turn, you want to take the center out a little at a time because you're trying to keep, the moisture inside the piece, and by doing it this way, you really take the moisture out. So as you've seen, I was spraying a little bit with water, and so normally you want to do your rim obviously first with wet wood, because that's going, as soon as that starts to dry up, which it's drying as it's turning, it's going to move quite a bit. So you want to get your rim and its thickness established, and then cut out more towards the bottom. This, I kind of like broke the rules, I guess. It wasn't a very deep project, and I figured as I was spraying at the water, I can help keep that from moving so much. And it did work. It moved, you know, especially you'll see when I'm towards the end of sanding, it moved quite a bit, but it didn't move too much to where I couldn't get it, you know, hollowed out decent. The light helps me see if there's any real thick spots or thin spots, being this is moving on the lathe, you know, and plus whenever I turned it around it was already kind of a little off. So that's what I use the light for, to see if there's any, you know, real inconsistencies in thickness other than what I can feel or what I can use my calipers to see or feel. I like to use my heat gun to help speed up the drying process, and you can see where the water is coming out on the piece. It'll leave like little speckles. I had about 30, 32 in some areas my moisture meter was picking up, so I just kind of like to test it beforehand, so I can see kind of where I'm at before I start sanding. The sanding process obviously helps dry it as well. So the wood in my shop that's just in my shop, reads about between 9 and 12% has been rating all week. So I don't expect for much moisture to come out, considering there's more in the air than there is in that bowl. But it takes about 5-10 minutes, probably less than 10 minutes, to sit there and just hold the heat gun while it spins slower. This is a sped up video, so it looks faster. To get it dry enough to where when you sand it doesn't gump up your sandpaper. And I really like using my heat gun on certain projects when I want things to be done quick, fast, in a hurry. It works pretty well. Make sure as your piece is drying, if you're doing wood, you check your chuck and tenon, make sure it's nice and tight around that tenon, because as the piece dries, that tenon shrinks. So be cautious in that and continually check it throughout your project. Just get in a good habit of doing it, whether it's with dry or wet wood. That way, no matter what you have on there, you created a very good habit in just checking all of your, you know, safety stuff. As you can see, the piece warped a little bit, but it's definitely not too bad to where I can't sand it or work with it or polish it. So the heat gun worked really well on this piece. Not all pieces I have great success in getting them to dry evenly. I guess it all depends on the wood you start with as well. So I was happy with it. I would use the microwave method, but I would have to take it off the chuck, and I already have enough wobbling going on in my lathe itself, so I don't want to encourage that behavior anymore. So I just use my heat gun, and it seems to work well for most pieces. So I kind of quit using the microwave method, and I may use it for some pieces. I guess it all depends on what project I have going or where I'm going with the piece. But heat gun worked great. I'm using 50/50 lacquer and lacquer thinner for a sanding sealer. This sanding sealer method works for, I would say, really dry pieces of wood. It does not, because it does, build on the surface. So we have a nice even, surface to apply a finish. With this particular piece of wood, it wasn't dry. Obviously, when I started, it was wet. When I started, it's drier now. So don't have any, shellac that's not mixed for OB shine juice on hand, but I'm looking to get some shellac flakes and just make my own with denatured alcohol, make my own sanding sealer that way. It's similar to OB shine juice, but minus the boiled linseed oil. It dries quicker. It doesn't build up as bad as the lacquer. So just be cautious when using lacquer and lacquer thinner. You'll find that it works on some pieces better than others, and types of wood better than others. And I think giving the shellac flakes with denatured alcohol a try would be definitely worth seeing how well that does on more, less drier pieces. With any kind of abrasive paste, you want to make sure you get all of that off, because when you go to put on your finish, the wax and the oils that are in the abrasive paste will prevent an even finish of OB shine juice or whatever it is that you plan on using. Obviously, you can't use shellac. I'm sorry, you can't use lacquer over top of the abrasive paste because of the wax that's in it. Will just as like oil and water on the piece, it does not mix. So just keep that in mind. If you plan on using a lacquer, do not use the abrasive paste. Now do this at your own risk, but I took a t-shirt, cotton t-shirt, and I shoved some like cotton stuffing in the inside of it, wrapped it up with a rubber band, and used that to apply. I was just kind of testing and seeing how that method worked out. It worked okay in some of the more crevicey areas. I'll be honest, some of the t-shirt fuzz ended up getting stuck in there, so I was like, well, maybe that wasn't such a good method. It was nicer to apply, like it felt like I was, the application of it versus using a paper towel seemed nicer, but there's obviously some downfalls with everything. So that was kind of a new method of applying it I was trying out, and I probably won't use it again just because the fuzz from the t-shirt kind of got, stuck in the shellac. But I did get it all out and repolish it. It worked out, but probably just won't use that method again. Just in case you guys want to try a new method, don't do it the way I did it. You may know this already, but for those of you who don't, put a little concave in your piece, especially this particular piece, because I know it is going to move some more because of how wet it was when I first started. Just put a little concave and leave room when you're hollowing. Keep that in mind when you're hollowing it out. Leave room, but you don't want the bottom too thick, because then it ends up being thicker than all the rest of the wood, and that's going to dry slower as the other parts of the thinner wood dries faster, and then you're going to have a really wonky bottom. So if you're turning wet wood, there's all types of things to keep in mind, and here I'm just drying it with my heat gun to get more of a better sand, because it was a lot wetter obviously in the bottom than the rest of it, because the tenon and everything's still attached and all that has moisture in it. But don't turn it too thin, but try to turn it thin enough to where it will dry at an even rate, and make sure you put a concave in it. Design some sort of feet or something, whether you're going to end up cutting them off or not, just to kind of remind you that, hey, I need to leave enough room to do that concave in the bottom of the piece. I'm just going to put tung oil on the bottom for now, and then I'll probably put some OB shine juice and polish it on there later. I just want it to finish doing what it's going to do and dry and what have you before I go and add anything else. Just oil for now and see what happens. But that's it finished. Thank you everybody for watching, and I hope you have a blessed week.